Hello and welcome back. I'm just getting some coffee, which is slightly too hot, I think. It's a really sunny day, and the plan is to be in the garden with some friends this afternoon, and I'm going to make pizzas. In the meantime, I thought I'd tell you about reading this week. It's been quite a full-on week for work and getting things off my desk. As I think I said earlier, getting things off my desk sounds like getting things off your chest, which it is a bit. But lots of outlines drafted, lots of things sent in, a novel parked in my head. And I've given a final chapter to a good friend to read. So, as I said before, I'm going to take some time out to read. Although I read quite a lot last week. I'll go through these. Everything I read was good, I think. Nothing disappointed me, which is good. I finished this earlier in the week, Sweet Home, Alaska. Carol Estby Dagg, and I was disappointed to find there's no sequel. This was, I think, in 2018, around about then. I can't see. 2019, maybe there will be, but I really loved this. It just hit that spot that that it intended to, the Little House on the Prairie books. It self-consciously acknowledges those as the kind of acme of family stories about pioneer living and scraping out a living in a new place. And this is set in the 1930s, and a family that goes without a record player, without a piano, all the things that they prize about their life in Wisconsin, without Granny, who's slightly snobby and stays behind. And we follow this family and the principal little girl at the heart of it, who is obsessed with books and starting a library, and she grows a pumpkin like Almanzo does in Farmer Boy, feeding it buttermilk through an incision in its stalk to make it grow plump. And she hopes to raise money to buy the teacher's second-hand piano to encourage her mother to want to stay in Alaska. Because all the kids really want to stay in Alaska. They don't want to go back to Wisconsin. And the kids do all sorts of amazing things. She creates a cookery book that they turn out on a mimeograph to sell at the fair, the town's fair. It's the whole thing of kids being resourceful and knowing kind of better than the adults. It's a very charming book, and one of those times that I want to go and send a letter to the author and say how much I enjoyed it. It's probably easier now to drop a line through somebody's website than actually writing a letter and sending it to the publishers, which I used to do all the time, especially in the 90s. And I had a whole kind of batch of letters back from people. And we all used to kind of type on typewriters, thinking about it. But it was a big thing for me, letting people know that I'd enjoyed what they'd written. And then from the other side of it, I love getting letters from people that I've never met who've read things that I've written. Online stuff is nice. It's all very well, but getting a letter from someone is really important. And a book like that, where it feels like a long letter sent from far away by somebody, I think that's what it evokes in me. And of course, letters are included in this as she communicates with people back at home. Right, so that was that. And then I've talked about this as well this week. Mary Lou's, she's a fantasy writer in her own right. This DC Icon series seemed to commission teen writers of YA, teen romance and fantasy, to supply early stories, backstories, sidestep stories for for DC heroes and villains. And this was one of the first, Batman Nightwalker. It's really good. It's a proper thriller with a big climax, hostage situation, and fights, and the kind of proto Batman guise adopted by Bruce Wayne, who's our lead character throughout this. And he has this ill-advised romance with a prisoner, this woman in Arkham Asylum, who turns out to be, and I guess it's no spoilers to say, one of the villains. It's really well done. I really wished it was the first in a series, but it's not. It's a one-off, I believe. I think they've adapted it into comics, which is interesting. But all the rest of the series are Wonder Woman, Catwoman, Superman, people I'm much less bothered about. And certainly Harley Quinn, I've just no interest really. But this world, which is its own world, it's not part of any established Batman continuity. She makes it her own, and I really believed in this particular Bruce Wayne who's starting out. So that was great. I love the idea of taking a range of heroes we know from one medium, whether it's films, TV, or comics, or all of them, as in Batman's case, and giving them to a proper writer from their own world and letting them do something with it. Doctor Who kind of did it with some writers known for doing other things. That was a whole series in the 2010s. And some of those were kind of hit and miss. The Prestige collection, as some Doctor Who fans call it, which is really annoying to those of us who they don't obviously count as prestigious authors. Yeah, some of those were good. I really liked the ones that other people didn't like Michael Moorcock's Doctor Who novel. Just because it was quite so obliquely attached to the main continuity. I find that stuff really enjoyable, to get somebody's individual take on things and not fitting in too much with what's gone before. So that was good fun. And then in a day, I read my Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens travel log about travelling from Carlisle to Doncaster on this ridiculous ramshackle adventure in 1857. Some of it's boring, and most of it's written in that kind of rambling Victorian prose that I guess I'm just not used to anymore. I'm not used to reading stuff that's older, and all the things they found were funny. Piling up clauses. Oh, not only was it like this, but this, but this, but this, and it wasn't like this. And no more did he, blah, de blah, de blah, and it goes on, for half a page, and then inverts itself amusingly. And you think, oh, get on with it. The funny thing about this is that it's 5 long columns for Dickens's magazine, Household Words, and they were clearly being paid by the word. So that's the Victorian kind of bagginess as well, that they're fulfilling their word count. And also because they're friends on a trip, it's full of in-jokes that we necessarily aren't going to get without a raft of footnotes at the end. And even then, we're still left out of it. There are... it's a bit like watching Vic and Bob and not being in on the joke if you're not. Actually, Vic and Bob are very good at letting you in on the joke. But there's scenes where they go and stay in this, I think it's Allenby by the sea in Cumbria. And there's bugger all to do, clearly, except eat shrimps. And there's this running joke about, there's the sea and here's the shrimps, let's eat them. So there's kind of, there are some really funny bits. The bits where they get off the train and go walking because they're going to go hiking. And they decide to climb a mountain, and immediately the character based on Wilkie Collins twists his ankle and sprains it and has to be carried about for the rest of the book, and just kind of moans and becomes even more idle for the rest of this adventure. They're kind of hopeless adventurers, and that's very funny. The 2 bits that become ghost stories, where one character in in a place that they've got to, suddenly sits down and relates a ghost story. There's two examples, and actually both of those are great. And the heart of the book is the bit that I was looking for, the bit that I'd heard of, where they go to Lancaster and stay in the, I think it's the Royal Hotel. It might be called something else, but it's the hotel in which Waterstones is based and has been for the last 30 years. And when that first opened, I became aware of this story, this ghost story, written by Wilkie Collins and Dickens in the room above the chandelier in the fiction section. And that story is actually fantastic, because that hotel is just a little way down the hill from the castle. It's all very visual for me. And they wonder, is that the castle where people are still hanged, facing the wall? And the answer comes, yes. And when they arrive, I think late at night, in this hotel, they're met by 6 old men. And it's all part of the haunting. They retreat to this room they're sharing in the hotel. And there's some funny stuff about 2 men sharing a hotel room. That's the thing that fulfills the spell that brings the ghost back. And I don't know if that's ever meant at any level to be homoerotic at all, because we're talking about a bride and bride cake and a bride who's tortured to death by her husband. There's funny stuff going on about sexuality, I think, under the surface of this Dickens and Collins story. Anyway, an old man comes in and he's got a constricted neck, and of course we know as the reader that he's clearly a ghost. He's clearly a hanged man who sits down with the Wilkie Collins character when Dickens has fallen asleep, and the old man tells him a terrible tale about a bride and her awful husband and what becomes of them. And it's really well done. Like, both ghost stories have a point at which the narrator goes, and that person was me, and it's meant to be a shock. And of course it isn't, but it's one of those, sensationalist novel moments. And it works well, especially when you can picture the place. So I think it probably would be worth a trip to go from Carlisle and then up this hill and then to the coast and then across the Lake District and then down to Lancaster. They don't make much of the Lake District, which is a real shame. I could have done with more of that. If you were doing a tour, you'd have to go and do some other literary places. You'd go and see Hawks Head and Beatrix Potter's house and all of that, maybe, to make it a literary trip, maybe. Or some Lakeland poets or something. They go to Doncaster at the end, and that bit's really boring. The stuff about I didn't appreciate that at all. The stuff about the horse races, not so interesting. The last 5th of the book, but it's worth it, I would say, for the ghost stories and for the Lancaster section. Right, that was that, and then the last couple of days I've returned to this, my project of rereading Jonathan Carroll's novels. This is the second, Voice of Our Shadow, which comes from 1984, but I read in 1993 when I look back, which is whatever it is, 31 years ago. And I'd kind of forgotten that I had. But when I read it, so much of it came back up vividly, lines even. And the characters, although I find that his characters stack on top of each other from one book to the next, you can read kind of shadow versions of them again and again. He has types. And because the whole thing's ghostly, that adds an extra kind of feeling of, is it real? Did I really read it or not? I must have had this out of the library. I think I used Lancaster Library a lot at that point. When looking at my reading diary, it was the point at which I'd moved from one house to another, further down the same road by the canal, a much nicer house, with a nicer household of people, of a couple of other nice people. And so it was a good time. And I must have come back from the library with armfuls of books by people who were becoming favourites at that point. And Jonathan Carroll was one of them. And I was in this world of really enjoying slightly spooky magical realist books. And this one is set mostly in Vienna, with interludes in New York, as this fella who's a writer goes between the two cities, the two countries, and two girlfriends, basically. It's all a bit straight, and and that can get a bit wearing, I guess, because it's very heterosexual in that there's no question of a frisson of attraction between the lead character and the man who dies halfway through, who comes back to haunt the main characters. Although they all talk about loving each other, the actual murkier, more perverse subtexts aren't teased out. It's all about, that sounds wrong. It's not exactly what I mean. I think because the plot depends on a certain kind of heterosexual jealousy and that motivating the hauntings, that's kind of slightly annoying. But the atmosphere is so thick and snowy and smoky and kind of gorgeously done. It just takes you with it in the New York sections just as much as Vienna. Like his first book, it finishes with a strange kind of gothic twist that brings everyone together suddenly, and then you're flung out of the book. There is, in this case, an epilogue that that soothes your worries slightly about the character, but it's still this gothic twist. And it's the kind of twist like from the old gothic stories, where somebody's writing and they say, and he's creeping up behind me right now, ... and that's the end. He kind of loves those kinds of endings. He disguises them. They're not quite as crass as that, but they are a bit like that. The whole thing catches up with the narrator, basically. But that doesn't make it unenjoyable. I really enjoyed this. And I've got the next 3 waiting in a pile there. I've been collecting them up. And it's lovely to have them all in the same kind of format when I've always thought of him as somebody slightly missing from my collection, because I had read him from the library and returned them and then forgotten which was which, because the titles, I think, are slightly nebulous. Voice of Our Shadow is so nebulous. It's a bit literary and it doesn't summon up any memories of the actual book for me. And it's the same with lots of the others. A Child Across the Sky, Sleeping in Flame, Bones of the Moon. They're kind of atmospheric, but there's not much content. The Land of Laughs, the first one, really does summon up something, but that's because I've read the book about 9 times. Anyway, I'm keen to read the rest of him. There's a novella that I'm missing from the early 90s. Anyway, that's my reading for this week. And I'm going to go on, and I've got this small pile of things for this week that I hope I'll stick to. I have actually been yanking piles of books around and finding things that I'd set by, so I might actually ruin my neat pile of summer reading. But that's quite good. It's good to throw in some random things. I will have to read some puffins that I've never read before. I do have a hankering for puffins. Anyway, I shall go, and I will see you again soon in the next episode. Goodbye.